Are you trying to discourage Cornel West from running?
Senator Bernie Sanders is responding to criticisms from his good friend, Green Party candidate Cornel West, following some comments that were made from Bernie about Cornel West and Cornel West about Bernie. So I'm going to get to all of that here. I'm going to get to a couple of clips from Bernie's appearances over the weekend on a couple of different shows. I'm also going to get to my thoughts on third parties, on Cornel West, on the Green Party, and on primaries. So wait for all that. First here, over the weekend, to kick this all off, Bernie Sanders gave a speech, and this speech was centered on pressuring the Democratic Party to reach out to voters. So he summarizes it here on Twitter, saying, "I gave a major speech about why Democrats must ignore the corporate wing of the party and instead put forward a concrete agenda that speaks to the needs of struggling working Americans." So Bernie Sanders understands that for Democrats to win, you need turnout. Turnout is not going to happen if you are simply resting on your laurels. You have to actually engage voters. You have to get people who don't normally vote out to vote. 2020 was a unique year in the sense that a lot of people came out to vote simply to vote against Trump. You can't always rely on that to happen. So even though Trump very likely will be the candidate again, it's a different situation considering currently he is not the president. So there may not be the turnout necessary just based on that. So Bernie understands the need to speak to people's issues and get them out to vote. Now, this is where we get to Cornel West and his recent comments about Bernie endorsing Joe Biden. So, as Political writes here, some politicians are so fearful of former President Donald Trump retaking the White House that, quote, they don't really want to tell the full truth, West said. Biden has created the best economy that we can get. Is this the best that we can get? You don't tell that lie to the people just for Biden to win. So this is where we get to Bernie Sanders and his response to these comments from Cornel West.
Well, my reaction is that certainly is not the best economy that we can create. That was what my speech was about yesterday. We've got to join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all. We've got to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half. We've got to raise the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. We've got to build the affordable housing we desperately need. But where I disagree with my good friend, Cornel West, is I think in these really very difficult times where there is a real question whether democracy is going to remain in the United States of America. You know, Donald Trump is not somebody who believes in democracy, whether women are going to be able to continue to control their own bodies, whether we have social justice in America, we end bigotry. Around that, I think we have got to bring the entire progressive community to defeat Trump or whoever the Republican nominee will be, support Biden, but at the same time, which is what I did yesterday, is demand that the Democratic Party, not just Biden, have the guts to take on corporate greed and the massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we see today.
All right, so before we have an honest conversation about this, I think it's important to point out where Cornel West was on this in 2020. So this is Cornel West on Mehdi Hasan's show on MSNBC. This was recorded, or at least shared, November 30th, 2020. Here is what Cornel West said back then about his vote for Joe Biden.
This year, you didn't go third party, did you? You voted for Joe Biden for the Democrat for president.
Part of an anti-fascist coalition, a coalition that said we've got to get Brother Trump out. He's a neo-fascist gangster. He calls into question the very possibilities of any kind of democratic politics. Looks like that coalition did come together. He's on the way out, we hope. And now we've got to deal with the neoliberal disaster of Biden and Harris.
So back in 2020, Cornel West agreed with the Bernie Sanders strategy of ensuring that Trump doesn't win, ensuring Republicans don't hold the presidency. He has changed since then. Now, it's also worth noting that back in 2016, Cornel West voted for Jill Stein in the Green Party, and he went on to discuss how he didn't expect Trump to win, and that he essentially regretted that vote, though it didn't matter as much because he's in Massachusetts, so Hillary's going to win that state anyways. But going to say, like, he learned from his experience in 2016 to then understand the need to get out Trump in 2020. Now he is running as a Green Party candidate and apparently no longer feels this way. So he's back to where he was in 2016. So I'm just, look, it's fine for people to change their minds and do whatever the hell they want. But it is worth noting here that Bernie has been consistent, whereas Cornel West has kind of gone back and forth. Now, on that point, and before I get to Bernie's appearance on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd, because I have more to say about that, there's a few things I want to say about this. I don't think shaming people into voting how you want them to vote is effective. My role here is simply to present these arguments, present the information, and give you my opinion. And take that or leave it. Like, it's just, I'm not, the idea that I'm going to be like, it's, you know, if Democrats lose, or if, let's say Trump wins in 2024, that I'm going to be, it's your fault for voting for Cornel West. That would be ridiculous. Like, that's not, I don't even think that's true. But even if that was true, I think that's not an effective way to get people on your side. But as someone who is not an American citizen, I can't vote for president. I think it's important to give my perspective as an outsider on how important I think it is to ensure that Republicans don't control the presidency. Now, there was this ongoing argument back in 2016 before Hillary Clinton lost, that if Hillary loses in 2016 against Trump, well, that means that the Democratic Party leadership will then have to see the error of their ways, and they will then finally appeal to working class voters, and they will speak to real needs, just like Bernie Sanders does. They will change their entire strategy. That didn't happen. They went on to then push Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders in that primary in 2020. There were no lessons learned because the Democratic Party does not exist to learn lessons. At least as the current leadership stands, they exist to uphold capitalism. Now, they do it in a way that is different from Republicans. Republicans really have no care at all for any working class people, care for anyone's human rights. So there are clear differences there. But that said, when it comes to a real working class message, the one Bernie Sanders puts forward, the Democratic Party leadership has no interest in pursuing that. So which also goes back to Bernie's attempt here to try and push the party to do that, I do think it's important to speak to those issues, but I'm under no illusions that, you know, the Democratic Party is all of a sudden going to turn into the Bernie Sanders party. That's not going to happen until actual leadership in the party changes, or until the party is taken over with more primaries from more left-wing candidates. Now, I want to get to the next clip here. This is Bernie Sanders on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd, and I got some comments about Chuck Todd's framing here on this question before I get to Bernie's larger answer.
Let me ask you about Cornel West. He was a co-chair of your campaign in 2020. He's flirting with a Green Party bid for president. The numbers tell the story between 2016 and 2020. You can directly correlate the two third-party candidates, their collective total. That was the difference between Biden winning states and Clinton losing those key states.
All right. Before I get to the rest of this question and Bernie's answer on Cornel West, I have to address just how ridiculous this framing is from Chuck Todd. This idea of him lumping all third-party voters together as one block, and if they had just voted for Hillary in 2016, well, she would have beat Donald Trump. What are you talking about? Have you met a Libertarian or a Green Party voter in your life? I, back in the day, ran as a Green Party candidate. I am very familiar with these kinds of voters. Green Party voters, so let's put aside the Libertarian voters, because especially them, why the hell would they vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Trump, if again, or anybody else except for their chosen candidate? But Green Party in particular, there's this idea that, well, if Jill Stein in 2016 didn't run, if there was no Green Party candidate on the ballot, all those Green voters would have voted for Hillary and she would have won. Based on what? My experience is most of those voters would have stayed home, or they would have voted for down ballot race and avoided the top of the ticket. So this idea of blaming third-party voters for voting for the third-party choice is just, it doesn't make any sense. There's no data at all to bear out that they would have voted for your chosen candidate. And this was all addressed in various articles and, you know, think pieces back in 2016. This is from The Guardian shortly after Hillary lost, saying that there are three possibilities besides choosing Clinton as a second-choice candidate. They might have chosen a different third-party candidate, they might have chosen to stay home, or they might have chosen Trump. So, again, understand, there is no given that a Green Party voter would have voted for Hillary Clinton. That is just ridiculous. The real reason, the real difference in 2020 is that a lot of young people came out to vote. Gen Z propelled a surge in young adult turnout. This was the defining, I think this was the major difference. That in combination with the desire to get out Donald Trump. So you have those two pieces. that is why I think Biden won over Trump in 2020 and why it was different than 2016. It has nothing at all to do with third parties. Now, let me get to the rest of this question and Bernie's answer.
That was the difference between Biden winning states and Clinton losing those key states. Are you trying to discourage Cornel West from running?
Well, I've known Cornel for many, many years. He's a very independent-minded guy. He will do what he wants to do. I just think, again, I think Cornel or anybody else can play an important role now about raising issues that are not always discussed. But at the end of the day, I think the progressive community in general and the American people have got to make a decision as to whether we stand for democracy or authoritarianism, or whether or not we're going to represent working class families.
One of your chief political advisors is concerned that Cornel West is being taken advantage of by maybe people that simply want his name on the ballot. Do you have those concerns?
I really haven't followed it that closely.
All right, so a similar answer there from Bernie Sanders as he gave on CNN. I don't think Cornel West is being taken advantage of. I mean, maybe there are people in his circle that are enjoying the attempt here to try and create some chaos, but I think Cornel West he's an intelligent guy. I mean, he's doing what he wants to do. To try and act like he's a puppet or something of somebody else, I just think I don't agree with that. But regardless, I respect Cornel's decisions, his own opinions here. I disagree with them. I think it is important to ensure that Republicans do not hold the presidency. Again, as an outsider perspective here, I really do not want a fascist state right next door. So it would be nice if you really keep out people like Donald Trump from power. But I want to get to a couple of things here. Or a couple last things. So there is another piece of this interview where I do disagree with Bernie Sanders, even though I understand what he's doing here. I want to show you that clip, and I'll discuss why I disagree.
Do you think there would be a robust discussion on this on the left if there were a competitive primary? Do you think there should be?
Well, what I think in this particular time, this particular moment in American history, when we're taking on somebody, the former president, who in fact does not believe in democracy, he's an authoritarian, and a very, very dangerous person. I think at this moment there has got to be a unification of progressive people in general all over this country, people who are prepared to make sure that women control their own body, that we deal with climate change, that we represent the needs of the working class of this country and take on the billionaire class.
All right. So I disagree with Bernie here in the sense that I do think a primary should happen and would be helpful. Bernie, I understand his position here. He's already endorsed Joe Biden. He's not going to discuss the need to primary Joe Biden at this point. But the reason why I think it's important is because it can lead to more energy that is put into a general election candidate. I think you saw that back in 2016. Even though Hillary Clinton lost, she would have lost by much larger margins had Bernie Sanders voters not voted. There is still this idea out there that I still see occasionally that, oh, Bernie lost Hillary the election, which is dumb on its face because in a democracy, primaries exist. There should not to mention Hillary wasn't even a sitting president. So there should have, of course, be a primary. But even despite that, Bernie helped Hillary because more of his voters voted for her than her voters did for Obama in 2008. And this has been well documented. This is the Washington Post back then. How many Sanders voters voted for Donald Trump? So two surveys estimate that 12% did, and a third survey suggested it was 6%, which may seem high to you. But compare that to Hillary Clinton in 2008. 24% of people who supported Clinton in the primary as of March 2008 then reported voting for McCain in the general election. And another estimate puts it at 25%. So multiple polls say the similar thing here. Think of the difference. Now, you may wonder, okay, if that's the case, then why did Obama win? Because Obama spoke to a Bernie Sanders kind of message, a real working class message. He brought out a lot of people in the general that did not vote in the primary. Hillary Clinton did not have that message. Despite Bernie's best efforts and the amount of time he campaigned for her in 2016, it didn't matter because Clinton herself was not speaking to those working class issues, unlike Barack Obama in 2008. So Bernie, and then we go to 2020. Joe Biden did adopt a lot of that working class message. Has this appeal of being working class Joe, even though, we could poke 1,000 holes in that, and I have. But he has this different perception than Hillary Clinton does. And because he also brought in Bernie Sanders and really brought him in a way that Hillary didn't in 2016, that also helped to bring, I think, a lot of the support out for Biden, in addition to, of course, the younger voter turnout, which I think is also attached to Bernie Sanders largely, and, of course, the anti-Trump vote. So all those factors combined to bring Biden to victory in 2020. And one last thing worth noting here, if Sanders voters hadn't voted for Clinton, she would have lost badly, not just the national popular vote either. Hillary would have lost all the states she lost anyway, but by larger margins. I would have also lost New Hampshire, New Mexico, and Minnesota by even the more expansive figure, Virginia. So Hillary would have lost even more states if Bernie didn't do the work he did in that primary and then his push for Clinton in 2016. So, bottom line, I think it's important for Biden to be challenged in a way that brings him more to a working class message. So I think, Marianne Williamson, I don't think her primary here is going to hurt Biden. Unfortunately, it's also not getting all that much attention in where she needs the attention, mainstream press, because largely we're talking about a different kind of primary. This is not an open primary, or not in the traditional sense. This is a sitting president in Joe Biden. So it's a different situation. But I don't think a primary would hurt Joe Biden in any way. You'd bring those voters out in the general. And I'm assuming here as well, I think fairly assuming that Marianne Williamson is going to support Biden over the Republican candidate, which at this point looks to be Trump. So that's not going to hurt Biden in any way. But we're still very early in all this, but I think it's important to have these conversations when we see them brought up here and begin to see them more and more brought up in the mainstream press around third parties, around the general election. I think it's important to discuss the need to vote and the different impacts that we may see going into the general.